First, it's saying at the top that I'm now live streaming. Matt, are we live, do you think?
Yeah, we're live. I just clicked the button.
Okay. So first, it's saying at the top that I'm now live streaming. Matt, are we live, do you think?
Yeah, we're live. I just clicked the button.
Okay. Okay. I was doubled up there. All right. So, oh, one more person's coming. So welcome to Code for Boston on the Code for America National Day of Hacking. If you are in the right place, you are at a talk that we are sponsoring from the operations manager at Foodlink, which is a food rescue organization in Arlington. And Elise is going to talk about sort of how COVID hit us and how it changed so many things about our business model and how we had to pivot to respond and the pressures that put on the organization with possibly some implications for our operations and technical systems going forward. So Elise Springerl is the Director of Operations at Foodlink. I am a member of the board and the finance committee at Foodlink, and we also have Howard Benjamin with us, who is also a member of the board and the finance committee and chair of the IT committee at Foodlink. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Elise and let her show her slides and begin to talk to us about how crazy the last 6 months have been.
Well, thank you, Annie. Let me just pull these up and we'll get going. Can folks see my slides fine?
Yep.
Well, yes, as I said, my name is Elise Springerl and I am our operations manager here at Foodlink. I'm coming to you today from our current hub of operations, which is actually out of the First Parish Unitarian Universalist Church in Arlington. They've very kindly let us use their sanctuary as our operations space during this time. So you can kind of start to hear some of the different ways we've had to make things work throughout this pandemic. But I'm going to start by telling you a little bit more about Foodlink and what it is that we do on a regular basis, because while the pandemic's affected how our work functions, the essence of who we are and what we do has remained the same. So we are a food rescue organization, which means that we sit at the intersections of excess food and hunger. We work with grocery stores, farms, and wholesalers to get their surplus food, and we redistribute it to community organizations serving those experiencing food insecurity. We really pride ourselves in ensuring that fresh and nutritious foods end up back in the communities that need them, as opposed to clogging up our landfills. Our mission is to be a community organization that rescues fresh food, alleviates hunger, and contributes to environmental sustainability. So you're going to see that kind of theme where we have this really dual mission. Our act is rescuing food, meaning getting food that would otherwise be wasted to nonprofits, community organizations, social service agencies that can get it to folks who need it. But we do it with two things in mind. The first is alleviating food insecurity, and the second is really promoting environmental sustainability. I like to say that we're solving one problem with another. So using that problem of excess food to solve the problem of food insecurity. And these are both really big problems. We waste 40% of all that we produce in this country, which is an astounding number. Most of the food that is wasted happens in our households. So we like to hope that we're making an impact by talking about this and by the volunteers who work with us. But we really work in this grocery store, distributor, and kind of institutional and food service space with the food that we rescue. The other problem, of course, is food insecurity. Currently, 1 in 7 folks in Massachusetts are experiencing food insecurity, meaning they are not sure where their next meal is coming from. This is a drastic increase from where things were before the pandemic and the ways they were trending. Previously, it was 1 in 11 in Massachusetts, and we had been on a really positive trend over the last few years of reducing food insecurity in the state. So it's been quite the thing to see it grow this much. We use kind of a hybrid model for our world. There are a lot of food rescue organizations that do what's called just-in-time food rescue, which is kind of this top half of my screen where you go to a food donor and it goes directly to recipient agencies, which are these folks on the other side. And I want to define those terms a little real quick. Food donors for us tend to be grocery stores, though we are growing our work in wholesalers. So working with places like Stonyfield Yogurt to get their product directly, as well as things like places like Cisco. We also work with farms and some cafes. And then our recipient agencies are these community organizations we work with. So they are traditionally, we do a lot of work in, we like to say we work where people already congregate. So we love working in housing facilities where we'll help residents manage pop-up pantries. We work in senior centers that will do food distributions, after school programs that are already serving at need youth, as well as places that are traditionally thought of as the emergency food system. So food pantries, soup kitchens, homeless shelters, those kinds of places. During the pandemic, of course, the kind of menu of recipient agencies that we work with has changed some because many of those places where people just congregate anyways had to shut their doors. So we've increased our work with places like food pantries that saw increased need. But so there's the just-in-time model that goes directly from the food donor to the recipient agency, and we do a lot of that. But over time, we've also discovered there's a strong need for interim storage. So many of the recipient agencies I mentioned are places that aren't necessarily food service ready. They don't have lots of cold storage or any storage for the food. And so a last minute delivery is incredibly helpful to them. So we found over time that being able to hold the food overnight can make a big difference in ensuring that the correct food goes to the right place. So just even using an example of some of these agencies listed on the screen, if on a Monday I'm getting a whole bunch of meat from Whole Foods, if my main recipient is this place on the bottom, Housing Families Inc., that's great because they love to get meat. However, if I am getting half pork and half chicken, it's not too good because they can't distribute pork because most of the folks they're serving are Muslim. So I would just have to, if I didn't have interim storage, we'd have to give it to them or scramble to call a bunch of places. However, on Tuesdays, we give to the Arlington Food Pantry or Arlington Eats. They have a large Chinese population that they serve who love to get that pork. So if I can hold it overnight, that makes a big difference. And that model for us, having kind of this hybrid of some just in time and some food banking, being able to store, works really well and has led us to purchasing and renovating what will be our operations hub at 108 Summer Street. So you can see a rendering here, but it's going to look like later this year when it's complete. And this is going to give us ample cold storage as well as indoor sorting space that will be accessible to folks, especially folks who might have some physical disabilities. So we're really excited for the community building that that's going to bring and just being able to consolidate our operations. We are currently working out of 4 different locations. So when we get in there, we know we're going to be able to work much more efficiently. And in fact, we expect to be quadrupling what we do from what we did last year. So we expect to get to about 2 million pounds in that building a year. Last year, we were about 600,000 pounds. This year, we're going to be close to 1 million because of some of the things I'll tell you about. But I want to set that stage because part of what's happened for us is we were already on this growth trajectory and we've been thinking about how we scale up. So coronavirus has been a huge challenge, but also given us this moment to take get some perspective on what it's going to look like when we grow. And I also want to mention, so Annie mentioned that Howard's here. He is one of our regular volunteers, and we do most of this work via volunteers. So when I'm talking about sorting the food, packing these bags, and ensuring that it gets to various places, it's a team of about 200 volunteers who are doing that. Most of them do treat it like their job, showing up every week for a regular shift, and we really couldn't do it without them. So kind of shifting into what's happened during the pandemic. Foodlink started to feel the effects of COVID-19 very quickly. As Annie mentioned, we are located in Arlington. We do serve most of Eastern Massachusetts. Our agencies range from being up in Lawrence and Lowell to as far south as we have a church that we'll pick up today that's in Attleboro. So we serve a wide range, but Arlington is where we started and where we're located, and we have a strong connection to the community. So the fact that some of the Arlington schools were the first affected by these shutdowns in Massachusetts didn't go unnoticed. And quickly that first week, many things began shutting down. And as institutions like schools and workplaces with commissary kitchens and restaurants began to close, there was a lot of excess food. We started getting a number of calls of places that needed some place to take it because they had no idea if they would be able to use it. You can see here, I love this photo of these two kids who helped their parents rescue from a local school because the pile of food is as large as they are. And we were really happy to be getting that institutional food early in the pandemic, because the other part that began to happen was traditionally the largest bulk of our food comes from our grocery store partners, and those donations took a drastic drop. As I'm sure you all remember, there were rushes on the grocery store and shelves were bare. And when shelves are bare, so are their donation bins. And so in that first month, we really ended up kind of flip-flopping some of what we were doing to have more of, let's see, sorry, I just saw the chat, to be getting a lot more from these institutions. And we're really glad that we were able to get that food because the demands on our partner agencies really took off. So there was a growing strain in the emergency food system very early in the pandemic that continues now. As unemployment rates rose and food was scarce on grocery store shelves, people turned to food pantries. We saw this in a number of ways. Our recipient agencies, of course, were communicating this to us. There were many agencies, as I mentioned, that closed. Things like after-school programs where children get afternoon meals and dinner weren't functioning. The senior centers where seniors go for congregate lunches, as well as the kind of pop-up pantries we do, couldn't happen. Some of the housing facilities no longer were having their pop-up pantries due to health concerns. So not only did people need more food, but some of these places that supported folks no longer were able to. The food bank that we work with, Greater Boston Food Bank, which is the largest supplier of emergency food in Eastern Massachusetts, really started to feel that strain too. We were hearing from our partners that get food from them. They were having trouble getting dock times because they do pickups. And that was the case for quite a long time because there's so many more places that needed more food. We also, all in the food rescue and emergency food space, started to experience that the kinds of food we were getting were different. So when I mentioned before, we're getting food from institutions. First, it was the institutions, and then it was actually the suppliers of the institutions. And food that's destined for a commissary kitchen looks very different than the food that's destined for your grocery store shelf. It's often, the produce may be not quite the right product line for a grocery store. So things that are maybe a little uglier, oversized, undersized, stuff that chefs know how to use, but that we're not as used to using. It's also food that's slightly processed. We start getting these big bins of diced tomatoes. That was something that was interesting to find something to do with. We were getting things like the mini milks that they give at schools as opposed to gallons of milk. So all of this food, it had already been in production to be certain ways where it was coming to us. So we were kind of posed with this interesting set of problems. One, we were actually getting while our traditional donations were down, we were getting way more food than we had before. And I mentioned before that we function out of a church sanctuary right now. We're actually in a store from the beginning, but I only have about 8 units of reach-in refrigeration that we use. That does not store a pallet of food. And we're also getting things that just weren't quite the right product line for our recipients at that moment, especially since congregate meals went along. Thankfully, the thing that the pandemic also did was free up some other resources that we wouldn't have expected. So we were able to forge some new partnerships. We began working with a moving company local to Arlington, Intelligent Labor and Moving, that mobilized their trucks to be doing pickups and deliveries for us. One of our partner agencies, another food rescue called the Boston Area Gleaners, also mobilized their trucks during this time because they normally function more in the fall and winter doing farm gleaning. We were able to take over a dining hall at Tufts University that wasn't in use for storage, which greatly impacted our ability to move food. And Boston College mobilized their food service labor to be, instead of cooking for students and students had gone home, they began processing food into meals that were more usable, as well as breaking down some of these commissary institutional sized products into more consumer-friendly packaging. You'll see here, this chart is the last 3 years, just it's our monthly box counts, how much food we pull in. And the yellow and red are the previous 2 years, blue is this year. So you can see that we more than doubled what we were doing. And those first couple months, April, May, and June, were a really wild ride of just constant work trying to move this food. And you can see that this begins to drop as some of these resources go away. So how important transportation and storage are. In July, thankfully, things started to reopen and our friends at Intelligent Labor were able to get paying gigs again, and they began to do moves, so we could no longer use their trucks, and the gleaners began to do their regular season of gleaning, so we couldn't use their trucks. So that dropped one thing. And then in August, the schools returned to session, so they had to repurpose their labor and spaces. We do have some new partnerships on the horizon that we think will take some of those places starting in the next month or so. So we expect some of those numbers to go back. But August, being a little quieter, has given us a chance to think about some of what we experienced. As you can imagine, doubling what you do overnight shows all the vulnerabilities in your system, as well as just what's been going on has shown many of the vulnerabilities in our food system. This is, in a way, my positive spin on it has continually been, well, as an organization that was looking to scale, we just got to break all the things that would have broken when we scaled to 4 times our size. So it gives us a chance to really evaluate that. And some of the things we experienced were things I already mentioned, the availability of proper transportation and cold storage. But then there was also pieces like inventory and supply chain tracking. So we have a system that we have a database system we use to track our food in and out. We use some spreadsheets to track where it goes. That became a lot harder when people were working long days, often remotely and often in the field, so only having their cell phone to do half their work, as well as just having twice as much and brand new food donors. So you see here an example of one of the Slack channels we were using during this time, where we were sending out inventory every day of what was at Tufts University, because we were all remote and we needed to know so that we could allocate it for our various agencies. As well as some of the conversations we had around, like, oh, can we take this cereal? Can we take that? Other things that we experienced were we didn't necessarily have clear intake processes for our new donors and recipients. Traditionally, we try to have long-running relationships, and those take a little bit to get started. So when I onboard a new food donor or a new recipient agency in our normal time, That's a couple week process at minimum. We're having conversations. We do some deliveries that we try things out. We do some site visits to chat about things. And so that gives a lot of time to kind of create that notation and communicate it to the teams. So we were trying to figure out new ways to quickly get the word out about who would take what they needed, when deliveries and pickups were. And because we had temporary facilities, these things went away. So some of those scaling challenges were there. And the truth is we don't expect things to, we expect the need to be there continually over the next long while. The food system is massive and it moves slowly, and the effects of something like the shutdown and the pandemic will last for a long time. Currently, 1 in 4 children in the US are food insecure, which is again a significant increase from where things were before the pandemic, and a really shocking and frightening number to me as someone who works in hunger advocacy, especially while we have so many of the traditional support systems that support childhood hunger alleviation kind of in difficult balances, like our school system. Many of our partner agencies are still not able to reopen. They have often shifted their work. I have a lot of senior centers that are doing home deliveries and after school programs that are figuring out ways that even though they have less kids coming back, they can send home bags of groceries. So there's a lot of creativity going on, but as these partners remain closed or don't have their traditional kinds of ways of fundraising or generating income, we're going to have to see over the next few years how that changes some of who's been serving folks. Our farmers and producers have adjusted to new things incredibly well, but it's a challenge when you're used to growing maybe endive for the upscale restaurants, and there's not really many upscale restaurants anymore. You have to change your product line. Or if you're used to making bins of chopped tomatoes and only half as much as needed, you have to figure out it. So there's a lot of adjustment that's been happening there. We also see our emergency programs timing out. So things like unemployment assistance, the expansion on the school lunch program, and even if they don't time out, this consistent uncertainty really impacts the people who are receiving these because they don't know what's going to happen next. And then organizations like us, we've been in sustained crisis response. We have figured out ways in which we begin to systemize some of this, but so many of these places have just been working around the clock for 6 months and things haven't quite ended yet. So those are just some of the continued challenges we have, and that is what I have for you. So I'd be happy to start taking some questions. I think I saw some things in the chat, didn't have a chance to really read them.
Yeah, so folks, I guess what I'd like is for folks to just unmute themselves and ask a question or chat the question, and I'm happy to ask it for you if you're feeling shy about the live stream. I believe that the first question we've got is from Michelle. Michelle, do you want to ask that question or do you want me to read it out?
Sure, I can ask that question. So I've heard that farmers markets, when farmers bring food to, to sell it, they often don't know who is going to want what food, and they end up with a lot of surplus. I was wondering if you folks have kind of a similar relationship with them as with the supermarkets and stuff, because you were talking about healthy food. So I was thinking, is that part of the picture there?
So Greater Boston is really fortunate that we have quite a few food rescue organizations, and we all kind of end up working a little bit geographically. So there's in addition to Foodlink, there's Food for Free and Love and Spoonfuls. Food for Free does quite a bit of the farmers market rescue in the region, which is great. So they have a lot of those relationships. The Arlington Farmers Market just gives their access to the Arlington Eats Market, which is the food pantry. And whatever they can't use, we actually take. And then we have a couple of CSAs that we work with in the summer to get any excess from their CSA or their farm stand. And then the Boston area gleaners, what they directly do is work on farms. So they're getting excess crops that weren't harvested. They do harvesting for them. and which is an excellent resource in this community because that is such a niche skill to be able to do that. So we work closely with them to get some of the food that they do harvest as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I have another follow-up question, but I'm gonna let other people talk first. So
Yeah, other questions from other folks? No questions. Michelle, why don't you go ahead and do your follow-up? And
okay. Sorry, so many questions all the time. So do you go through cycles of looking for new partners? You kind of like in, February to March or whatever, we're looking for new partners. And then, or are you just constantly looking for new partners on either end of the thing? Like, is it, how does that cycle look, that process? I mean, after pre-COVID and after COVID kind of thing.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So I like to say that our work is really a balancing act of having enough food donors and enough recipient agencies that we always have just a little left at the end of the day, because I want just a little so that I know everyone got enough, and we can always bring it to the next day. But so traditionally, that's a lot of how we've grown over time, is that we will hear someplace, like one of our agencies we're working with kind of starts to need new food, and we find a new food donor, and then it's a little bit more, so we bring up another. So we've kind of done that stepping, and it's not necessarily been on a schedule. It's been just kind of organically growing. As we embark on this new chapter in our hub, we are looking to more systematically grow. We know that our year does work on a cycle. There are times in the year that we get more food and times in the year that we get less food, and our product that we get varies throughout the year. So right now we're very much in farm season. We're going to get a lot of excess produce, both from the grocery stores, our farms that we work with, the gleaners, the wholesalers, while in about a month, we're going to be in holiday season, and we're going to get excess holiday products, things you associate with Thanksgiving and Christmas, not just like the candies and stuff, but also turkey and green beans and all of that. So we tend to work in kind of that step up, but we are going to be looking at how we systematically onboard new places, and we're looking for where there's potential for growth too. So one of the pieces that has really emerged for us during the pandemic is with wholesalers. There's a lot of waste at the wholesale market, and we think that we'll be able to take much more advantage of that in our new space with walk-in refrigeration.
great. So
Thank you.
Thad has a question that, oh, I'm sorry, Michelle. Thad has a question that came in over YouTube. Thad, do you want to unmute and ask that question directly, or do you want me to read it?
Sure, thank you. So Rayshana Gray on the YouTube stream, I also invited them to talk on the Zoom if they have a chance, but in case they don't, her message says, "Hi, Elise. I'm connected with the family behind Clark Ridge Farm in Johnstown, New Hampshire. I'd love to potentially connect with you. How can I do that?"
I think the easiest way to connect with me is go to our website, foodlinkma.org, and look on our staff page. You can get my contact information and just give me a call or shoot me an email. Happy to talk to you. There may be some places locally in New Hampshire that would accept the food, and I'd be happy to see if I know anyone up there to connect with first, because sometimes bringing food over state lines can be tricky. Which is another part of things we learned in coronavirus. But please connect, because I am positive that there is a place that we can find quickly that would love to get that food, whether it is us or someone else.
Thanks so much. And she mentioned that she's going to try to join the Zoom, so maybe she'll have more questions later.
Great. So I'll keep a lookout for her to land in the waiting room. Okay. So we have another follow-up question on the chat, which is there a financial incentive for the food providers? And do you find that food providers find that motivating? And if not, how do we get them motivated to join the program?
So yes, there are two incentives in the state of Massachusetts. So first off, there is a incentive nationally, which is a tax rebate. So that is something that really helps folks want to donate. In Massachusetts, we have an enhanced tax rebate or tax incentive for food donation under the Food Donation Act, which helps as well. But one of the bigger parts, I think, in Massachusetts that helps incentivize this is the organics waste ban. Any company that produces, I believe it's over 1 ton of organics waste a week, which includes food and such, is subject to a fine if they are not disposing of that organics waste either through compost, anaerobic digestion, or food donation. So that dual piece of, actually it's a triple piece, of one, that food donation alleviates that potential fine, as well as provides a tax incentive, and as well as the fact that that is the free version of those two or those three potential ways to alleviate organics waste is a huge incentive that many places want to take advantage of.
Great. So Rayshana has actually joined us. Elise, I'm going to suggest that you flip from the slides to our website.
Yeah,
And actually show how someone would get a hold of you.
sure thing. Let me just.
And then in the meantime, if folks have other questions and you want to chat them at me, I will line them up. And we'll see what else we can tell you about Foodlink.
Let me just, so, my email is espringle@foodlinkma.org if anyone needs to reach me, but so you know where that is. Our website is foodlinkma.org, and about us and our staff, you'll find me under our programs, and I'm happy to chat more about any of the things we've talked about today. And I will put this in the chat as well.
Great. So one of the other things we could talk about this morning, if no one else has questions, and I'm really hoping some more folks come up with some questions, is I could perhaps persuade Howard to talk for 2 minutes about what it's like to volunteer for Foodlink. And then I'm happy to, well, we do have a question.
I don't know. You let Howard talk for a few minutes about
Then I'll get to that question.
here, and then I'll answer that question because that's a good one.
All right.
Sure. So I think I'm off mute now.
Yep.
Yeah, so I started about 3 years ago volunteering. I was, my background is from biotech. I retired and I was looking for a way to give back into the community. And so I had met Foodlink at a sustainability fair at Lexington High School. They had set up and we're just talking about what they did. And I really thought it was a great organization that was really trying to increase the efficiency of food in our, in our capitalist system where we produce great quantities, but we don't distribute very well. And Foodlink was really helping solve that problem. And so once I finally had some time, I started working. And, I go Monday mornings at 7 o'clock to Trader Joe's in Arlington. Depending upon the time of year, it's 2 other people or 1 other person. We collect about 20 to 30 banana boxes. So these are just banana boxes filled with food that Trader Joe has decided that they can't sell because the box has been crushed and no one's going to buy it, or the bag is partially got a hole in it, but it's still, the food is intact, but it just doesn't look cosmetically right, or the bananas are, a lot of bananas are just getting too old that people don't want to buy. Or it's a bag of oranges with 1 bruised orange. No one wants to buy a bag with 1 bruised orange, and the store can't take that orange out. So they have to get rid of the whole bag. But we can take that bag and then open it ourselves, take out the bad one, and we can then distribute all those oranges to the school kids. So we go in the parking lot, we sort all that food, it takes 20, 30 minutes, depending upon how much food we have. And then, at least before COVID, we would then take that food and bring it right over to an Arlington housing unit that's right behind Trader Joe and set up a mini pantry. And the clients in that in that housing group would then come down out to all these tables where there would be oranges, there would be cookies, there'd be bread, there'd be various different types of produce that we rescued, prepared sandwiches that were approaching their sell-by dates, but were still good. The store doesn't want to sell them because it's only got 2 days left of their time and no one wants to buy a sandwich at that time, but they're still edible food. And so we put that out, the people come down and take it. That's one of the places we distribute it. I also then go back to the headquarters, and Elise and the rest of the members have boxed up new boxes for me. I collect about 16 or so boxes, and I go back out delivering to a homeless shelter in Malden or a women's living group in Medford. And on a weekly basis, I'm bringing them 3, 4 boxes of food that contain, again, fresh produce, meats, frozen foods it's great. We just now have a new van that has a refrigerated van compartment. So we can put the food in there and keep it cold on those hot days. And so it's really great bringing out this nice cold box of food that they want that's really nice and cold on this nice hot day. And so it's a really fun activity. I get a chance to really rescue food. I get a little bit of work out myself, but I get out in the community. And in the time of COVID, it's really a great time to actually have an excuse to get out there and meet people in a safe and controlled fashion, but and help them in this time of need. So that's what I do for my rescue.
Great. So we're starting to get a stack of questions here, and I'm going to let Elise answer the first question, which I think, Alex, is that you on our Code for Boston Zoom?
No, it was me.
All right, it's Matt. Matt, you want to read that out because it's a really great question.
Yeah. So, I saw that you shared out some of the different tools you're using with Slack and everything. And I imagine, a lot of it is fantastic, but you've probably experienced some challenges with some of these tools. And so if you could invent a magic tool to just get this to all work together, what would you invent? How would you wave that magic wand?
Yeah, that is an excellent question that I think about a lot. For us, one of the challenges is, and part of the challenge that we actually do thrive in is trying to figure out what food needs to go where. So I just kind of some of these, there's another question in here around how do we know what foods or what our agencies, where do agencies list the needs for us? And another one around kind of upticks in specialty foods like vegan and gluten-free products. So part of what we do is we work really hard to build these relationships with places to then ensure that they're getting the right kind of product. And that can be a lot to hold, knowing all these different pieces of what 50 different agencies need. And pair that with the fact that we're getting food from 50 different places and we're trying to figure out what food came from what place and where it went, where it needs to go, and then where it went. And report that out to the corporations and the people who run the companies so that they know how their food served others, or feed that to the agencies that receive the food in case there's ever a recall. So that supply chain management and kind of helping keep track of what food needs to go where. So kind of this hybrid of both inventory management plus contact management would be a fantastic thing for us.
Cool.
So Pablo, do you want to ask your next question? Or Matt, did you have a follow-up?
No, I just wanted to thank for the answer, because that was helpful and definitely some interesting stuff to noodle on.
We're noodling on it. Trust me.
That's been part of this whole thing is like I said, we My positive spin on this is that we broke all of our systems, and that's what we broke. Is our inventory management was built for 50,000 pounds of food a month, and we were doing well over 100. And it was just like, how are we doing this? Which is the version we came up with, was using a Slack channel, which worked only because we were all in the field and needed something immediate on our phones. But it's Annie and I spent a lot of time talking about this.
A lot of time. And Howard also.
Yes.
So Pablo, do you want to ask this question directly, or you want me to read it out? If you unmute yourself, I think you can unmute yourself.
You can ask. I got background noise here. Feel free. Thank you.
Okay. Pablo has one question and later on another one, but I'll read them both out. The first one is Foodlink part of a national organization, or is there any association of all Foodlink type orgs in the country?
Yeah, so there's a couple different groups who do some national work on this. The association is the Food Rescue Alliance, which is a group of it's actually an international organization of food rescue organizations across the globe. That was a repetitive sentence. But we get together, right now we're actually getting together every other week. It used to be more like once a quarter to talk about things, but given how much this pandemic has really called for our work, we're getting together more often, and we work on some collective solutions around stuff too.
Great. And Rayshana has joined us and has another question. Rayshana, do you want to unmute and ask that question, or do you want me to read it?
I've just unmuted myself. Hey, everybody. I'm Rayshana Gray. Very quickly, yes, indeed, my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm with Harvard University and the Cambridge Historical Society. It's nice to meet y'all. My question is, has there been an uptick in requests for specialty foods, for example, organic, gluten-free, vegan, etc.? Do y'all distinguish between the donations?
Yeah, there is desire for some of those. I'm not sure if we've only existed for 8 years, so I don't know that we've particularly felt the uptick, but I know that within the last decade, there has been an uptick compared to previous decades. It is interesting though, because we get a lot of specialty products, especially since our two main grocery stores we work with are Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. And while we have a couple agencies that are really excited to get this stuff, we actually for a long time worked with a gluten-free food bank that specifically distributed gluten-free foods to food pantries that had medical needs within their communities. But funny enough, I think we get more vegan food than we have demand for sometimes, which it's an interesting thing of these grocery stores versus some of the communities that we're serving right now. But there is more and more interest, and there's more and more interest on healthy foods as well.
Great. And we have a question from Miranda. Miranda, do you want to unmute and ask your question, or let me know and I'll read it out?
Sure, I can. Wondering how you fund your operating costs, and how the pandemic has maybe increased the need for sanitizing products and protective equipment. Because I know this bakery I worked at, my boss found it really hard to find masks and gloves.
Yeah. So the way we fund our operating in general is through kind of three main pieces of fundraising. One is through grant writing, so having kind of program-specific grants. Another is through family foundations and large-scale donors. And the third is through individual donations. And really our budget tends to be evenly split between those three. So we have folks who are regularly working on ensuring that we have the funding that we need. The piece of getting protective equipment, one of the things that was really fortunate for us in this moment is as we were in the middle of a pandemic, folks really wanted to give to organizations that supported their communities. So we did see an uptick in interest in our work, both financially, which was really great. We had a really great first quarter of giving this year. And we were able to find quite a bit of cleaning supplies. We did a cleaning supply drive early on, where we just put a list up and asked the community to donate things. So like if they were able to get a bottle of bleach, you know, get it for your family first, and then if you can get a second one. We've been able to get that for the most part, but we've had to get really creative too. Clorox, like disinfecting wipes, are still fairly hard to get, and they were really hard, and we were using those heavily. We are using those heavily because we regularly sanitize our vans since we have many different drivers. So one of the creative solutions we came up with was we found out you could make your own with shop towels and the more liquid hand sanitizers that have been coming out. And we happened to get a pallet of hand sanitizer donated from a group that couldn't use it. And so we make our own sanitizing towels now. So we've had to get really creative on those fronts.
Cool. I would be remiss as a member of the finance committee at Foodlink if I didn't point out that there's a donate button on our website. So if you are so inclined, you have two ways you can contribute to us, your time or your money, and we will take either. And then our next question is from Ryan Taylor. Ryan, do you want to unmute and ask that question? Because it is also a really good one, or I'm happy to ask it for you. Ryan?
I think Ryan's saying, go ahead and ask that question for us.
Okay, great. All right. So Ryan's question is, not sure if you've touched on this, but curious how the lessons learned are transferable to communities in food deserts.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of how we view our work is resource redistribution. When we first started, as I mentioned, we started here in Arlington, and we've kind of quickly maxed out the organizations locally that needed food. So we go much further out, and it's a lot of saying, okay, this community has a large density of grocery stores, and we're getting plenty of food here, but this other community nearby does not and needs the food. So we do that transportation piece of getting it from one place to another. So that's part of how it's transferable. The other piece is, I mean, for us, one of the lessons of doing food rescue is how abundant this world is. I mean, we have so much waste, we have so much surplus. So the matter of food deserts is a problem of, those are problems of systematic oppression and systematic issues, as opposed to resources not being available. So while this is like, I don't think this is a new thing for many of the folks who experience this, but the learnings of seeing how much excess there is in certain places and how much resources are kept out of other places, I think is a transferable lesson of the systematic issues we have to work on. Foodlink is, for all that we do, we are really a Band-Aid solution to systemic problems that will take bigger solutions around creating a more equitable food system. So I think that that's the bigger call that brings as well, that it shouldn't be that we have to like rescue food from a more resource neighborhood to get it to folks who need it. There's other ways we could be doing that. Thanks for that question. It's a really good one.
Really good question. So we have another question from Pablo, which is, are there agencies where food is dropped off at that can list out their food needs? So for example, if you have pork or chicken, is this type of food that an agency is seeking, is this part of the onboarding intake? Like, how do we figure out what should go where? I think is what I was interested in.
So we're really about relationship building at Foodlink. We have deep relationships with the agencies we serve. Howard mentioned before all of his regular deliveries he does, and we rely heavily on those volunteers who are regularly delivering places to relay messages back. You hear things every time you do a delivery of like, oh, that yogurt you brought last week was a big hit, or You guys brought a lot of bags of lettuce last time. Can you bring half as much? So we keep record of all of that. I also do regular site visits with our agencies to ensure that they're getting the right kinds of product. We do a yearly survey where they have a chance to give feedback. So we're doing touches at multiple points throughout the year to ensure that we're hearing that they're getting the correct foods, and we can adjust, because over time the populations that they work with can change too. In addition to that, I think it's important that we are on site for these regular deliveries and see things. That earlier question around like dietary needs and specialty diets, one of the things that I find interesting is we really do need to hear from the folks who are receiving the food at the end of the day too, and doing those deliveries can help us hear that, because sometimes the people who administer programs get one thing caught in their head, and over time folks change, the people who show up change, their needs change, and we try to be responsive to that.
Okay. So our next question is from Nathan. Nathan, do you want to ask that question directly?
Sure, yeah. Hi, Elise, thanks for your presentation and of course for all your work. I was just curious, before you were talking about how you might hear about a need and then you'd find a person who could donate. I was just wondering, in general, how do people find you? How do you find them? Do you feel like that's a challenge? And I'm assuming the internet, but I'm just kind of curious how that usually works.
Yeah, it's partly the internet. It's partly when you have a van with your logo on the road for 60, 70 hours a week. It really does a good job of advertising. But it's a variety of ways. It's a lot of word of mouth too. So many of actually, for example, we work heavily with Trader Joe's, and the way that Trader Joe's functions in their employment is people tend to, the way they move up is they move to another store. And so we've worked with the Trader Joe's in Arlington for 8 years. And as the folks that we worked with there have been promoted and gone to other stores in the region, we get calls from them and say, hey, can you come do our food donations? So it's a lot of that kind of organic piece. We also have a really close relationship with the Greater Boston Food Bank. And Greater Boston Food Bank is part of Feeding America, which is a national organization of food banks. And many of these national grocery store chains and food distributors go through Feeding America to set up new relationships. And Greater Boston Food Bank doesn't particularly want to do food rescue directly. The scale we do doesn't work in their model. So they direct a lot of that to us. So these various kinds of relationships that we have in the community help us get new food donors. And on the recipient end, a lot of it is folks knowing about us through partners that they work with or just internet searches. I think as we scale, we're looking at what are the new ways we reach folks. And sometimes we do our own outreach too. We'll, cold call some places or hear about a place that might need food and give them a call.
Great. So Pablo also asked the perfect last question. And Rishana had commented that she would love to see us add some of what we talked about this morning to the FAQs on our website, which I will follow up with our team on. But that perfect last question is, what are the technology areas that Foodlink needs help in from Code for Boston? So I don't know if we've thought deeply about that, but I think if Code for Boston was interested in working with Foodlink on a project, we would come up with one. Elise, do you want to just talk for a couple of minutes about sort of the things that we just reiterate the areas of, technological development we're worried about right now?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, as we begin to scale up, we see the holes in kind of our systems that have been based on I think our relationship building is so important, but we don't necessarily have good ways to keep records of those. But probably the most crucial thing though is going to be our inventory management system and understanding exactly where food is coming from and where it goes, and having really easy ways to track that so that it's user friendly. And then volunteer management. When you have a team of 200 volunteers, that's a lot to take care of. And the system we're currently using is on its way out in many ways. So those are some of the main ones. We also are looking at ways that we're managing our building when we get into it. Things like we're going to have a walk-in fridge and freezer. So not just inventory, but ensuring that those are in, that we're alerted if something goes wrong, stuff like that, are technology solutions that we've been implementing as well. So that's kind of, some of the main ones. And there's also, there's the systemic pieces of this too, where matching software for truckers and for food distributors is something that doesn't exist in the same robust way it works on a local level. I talk a lot about these grocery stores we're working with, and we have like a regular schedule with them. But we periodically get calls from a truck that will have a rejected load of food. And oftentimes these truckers are scrambling and trying to figure out a local food bank or food pantry that might take the food. So they're just like on Google looking in whatever community they had a rejected load in. So things like that are systemic issues that I think will be interesting to tackle in the future as well.
Great. So I think we are sort of at the end of our hour, and I really appreciate everyone's attention and the really, really excellent and interesting questions that you all asked. I hope you sort of have a good picture of the challenges facing Foodlink and the food system in general from this talk. I don't know, Matt, if you want to add any last thoughts from Code for Boston about how this is fit into the National Day of Hacking. Okay, I guess maybe not. But it's been really great to be able to talk about this to everyone. And if there is a possible project that intersects these two organizations that I love and care about deeply, I will certainly see if I can shepherd that through. So stand by and look for more interesting stuff about Foodlink in the future. And we're done.
Thank you all for having me this morning. It's always great to share a story.
Great. Yeah, thanks for coming, guys. All right, so Howard and Elise, I'll follow up with you a little later and get you the recording and so on and so forth.